I think I need to say that I'm very emotional. And I'm trying to think about why that is, and I think we're here for two reasons. One is to hear the truth. And the other is because we know that we have been heavily censored, and not just for the last 4 years. And there's something healing about being with a group of people that want to know the truth. And to know that it's safe enough to have these kinds of conversations. Because I assume all of you have experienced the shame, the gaslighting, the name-calling, the disrespect from family, from friends, from colleagues. And as a consequence, I know that in my own way, I recognize I'm guilty of it as well, is that I have self-censored. There are conversations I no longer am willing to have with people because I've lost confidence that they can hear me. And I'm looking forward to what David has to say because he's really helping us to revisit those conversations again and hold hope that it can be different. And the last time that I had this kind of a feeling was at the National Citizens Inquiry. And I helped to organize the hearings in Vancouver last year, and again, I participated in the Regina hearings just recently. And what I can tell you is that we had many people who wanted to tell their story, but they were afraid. And as the person who scheduled the speakers in Vancouver, I had a number of speakers who withdrew at the last minute because they were so afraid of being shamed for telling their truth. But those that overcame their fear and spoke, something remarkable happens. People find their voice, they affirm their authority, and they realize that there's people that want to hear what they have to say. And they become stronger, and I would suggest wiser as a result of that experience. And so I want to honor Jonathan and the We Unified group for holding this space so that we can have conversations that are safe and are about truth.
Thank you, Ted. It's fair to say we're in the most problematic time in history, certainly that we can think of. But I think we also miss that the flip side of that coin is we also have the greatest opportunity that I think anyone could imagine. Now, it was Max Planck that actually said science moves on one funeral at a time. And established ideas will always resist being challenged. People in power will always resist being challenged. It's just the way it is. But what's happened the last 5 years is that there can't be a single person on the planet that wasn't jarred in some way. Now, what happens is that the way we see the world and the model that we have of the world has been destroyed. I think everyone's been spun upside down. And there's a classic theory in psychology that talks about there's a fork in the road now. You've effectively got PTSD for a lot of people, And that's there. There's a lot of trauma. But what's not mentioned is that you've also got PTG, and that's post-traumatic growth. And when they've studied people that have experienced post-traumatic growth, they pretty much say that they wouldn't undo the collapsing of the world. They do not want to take the blue pill and go back. And the world has revealed itself the last 5 years. And so many people have showed their true colors, the vulnerability of people. And to share a stage here with the people here, and I spoke to Jay and a few others, and I said, because I was really made aware in about 2004, really how the world worked. And I worked and consulted to a lot of big finance companies, and I was like, this is a Ponzi scheme. This doesn't make sense. This isn't helping the people. And I had worked on a project with Bruce Lipton a few years ago, and we had expected something like this to be coming along. So the funny thing is, we invested in a farm in New Zealand as being the safe place to go to, and and the irony is really incredible. So, I mean, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia are 3 countries that are close to my heart, and I visited many times, and there's a lot of Canadian people in our group. And our goal really is to enable conversations again. We want to assist the scientists in getting their message across, because I don't know if anyone's noticed, there's a little bit of propaganda going on. And we want to release a lot of the information to show you guys how it works, how the shame and the fear and all those things you don't have to experience. There are ways that we can combat this. And to have empathy for those that went along. These numbers come up again and again, 10, 70, 20. It's so consistent through so many studies. I've mentioned, I think personally, there's a safety catching consciousness where there is a group of people that are not going to follow where the herd goes. Yeah, the bees have the same sort of safety catch in there. And it's really important that we acknowledge where we've come from. We don't deny our experience. We just be honest. We address it, and then we say, okay, what are we going to do about it? And certainly from my perspective, it's been an absolute pleasure working with BC Rising and the other Canadian groups. The open minds, the desire to want to connect with people and get over the anger and all the other emotions that have really been plaguing us. But the main point I really want to share is that PTG, that's what we want. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to start with some of my questions. And these are just going to be open. And these are questions that have just been sourced from people all over the world over the last 4 years in my experience, and things that I know are on a lot of people's minds and consciousness. And I think the first question is about anger and resentment. As I said when I was speaking earlier, one thing that I truly believe is that just across the entire globe, and I know for sure in this country and in this room, there are going to be some people who are feeling some sense of resentment, anger, and frustration in all sorts of different directions for various different reasons, some of them obvious, some of them very specific and personal. How do you think it's best for us as individuals and collectively to move forward past this point of anger and resentment? I don't know who wants to take that first. Jay?
So I've gotten, this is probably the most unpopular thing I've said in the context of this, of folks who've followed me. But I think that forgiveness is the central tool that we have, the most powerful tool that we have. I mean, I've had friends betray me. 100 of my colleagues circulated a secret petition trying to get me silenced. Some of my friends tried to get me fired from my job. And I have to live with them. And I've seen what good friends of mine who've been harmed and hurt even more than I have, where they've held on to that anger, this desire for retribution, and it's really corrosive to them personally, right? It really, and for me, I've taken as a spiritual practice to forgive my enemies, and I can't even begin to tell you the power of that. It doesn't mean that I'm going to trust them the same way again. That's just foolishness. But it does mean I'm not seeking their vengeance, I'm seeking their good. And I think that has made all the difference for me personally. I want to build coalitions with those people that were on the other side. I want to convince them. I want them to come back to reason again. And the only way we do that is not seeking their bad, but but I do want reform. So I'm gonna keep saying what I believe, even if it makes them unhappy with me again. I'm not trying to make them like me, but I also don't want I don't want vengeance on them.
I completely agree. If we focus on vengeance, we'll never get to reform. It will never happen because people will get in their defensive posture. I'm interested in the truth, and I'm interested in reform. And you can be angry. You can still, I'm sure you're angry. You're still, yeah.
I'm trying.
See it come out on Twitter once in a while. But yeah, if we get focused on retributive justice, it's just going to be an endless cycle. Guillotines bring more guillotines. Everybody ends up on the guillotine eventually. And if you can focus on forgiveness, it's a much healthier place for the individual to be. And if we can focus on the reformation and maybe some apologies along the way, we'll get there.
Amen.
I can actually, so emotions is one of the things we really address on the project, which is the reachingpeople.net project. And we try to show people how to have a dialogue. Dialogue's very different from a debate. Debate is trying to prove you're right. A dialogue is very different, and we need much more scientific dialogue and a lot less debate. Now, when people ask me what's the single biggest thing I can do to be able to connect better to my loved ones, my family, and to be able to talk to them, I said the first thing you've got to do is process the emotion. Every single word we say, if it's through anger, that person's going to feel the anger. Okay? And anger is driven by a number of different things. It would be our belief systems and unresolved emotions. But if you can sit with the anger and you can process it, then when you talk to that person, it's not going to come out. Because people try to hide it. I'm not angry. Okay? And I say, you want to see someone's true intentions, watch their actions, not their words. Okay? So we do actually have a number of videos that we share with people, and I know there's people in the audience that have done these, and you can literally just sit with the emotions, or literally follow a video that will guide you through how to release that emotion. And time again, I'll say to someone, when you picture this person, how do you feel? And they're like, argh, and they're swearing, they're anger. And then after processing those emotions, it's usually, I feel sorry for them. Or he was just misguided. So for me, the biggest and single most effective manipulation tool that all the institutions and governments have is the manipulation of our emotions. It drives our behavior, it drives us to do things. Look at the crazy things people did. Literally calling friends and relatives, like, have you joined a cult? Okay? But not knowing what the behaviors of a cult are. So yeah, so processing those emotions is going to go a long way to being able to connect back and build those bridges back to your loved ones.
Can I tell a story?
Please do.
Well, first of all, I just want to add to what David said. I mean, my career is a psychotherapist, and so I spend a lot of time working with people to process their emotions. And what I learned in this work that we're doing of trying to tell truth is that if people hear our anger, they can't hear us. And so it's important that we move through that and figure out a way to process that. But can I tell you a journey that I was on with my son? So for those that know my journey, my son was severely vaccine injured, developed an uncontrolled seizure disorder. And at its worst, Josh was seizing 12 to 15 times a day, and each seizure was 15 to 20 minutes long. And I was angry, I was resentful, and I was afraid. And I probably spent the first 5 years of Josh's life carrying those emotions because I was so angry with what had happened to my son. But I had this life-transforming experience with him. Josh and I had this little father-son rituals. When I would come home from work, I would drive the car up the driveway, park it into our carport at the back of the property, and he would hear the sound of my car. And if he was well enough, he would run to the window so that he could see me get out of the car. And when he saw me, he would yell, "Hi, Dad." And I would say, "Hi, Josh." And I would come in the house. But as he got sicker and sicker and the seizures got more and more frequent, the number of times he was at the window got fewer and fewer. On this particular day, I drove up the driveway and I parked my car. And I turned to the window, as I always did. And there he was in the window. And he was very happy to see me. His little nose was flat against the glass, and he had a grin from ear to ear, and he yelled, "Hi, Dad." And I said, "Hi, Josh." But because it had been a while since he was in the window, I just stood there and looked at him. Because I wanted to take in every bit of that greeting. And something happened that I don't know how to explain. I can just tell you what happened. As I stood there looking at my son, I heard a voice. And the voice asked me a question. And the question was, when your son looks through the glass at you, what does he see? So I thought about that. What does he see when he looks at me? And the answer was really clear. He sees a father who's angry. He sees a father who's afraid, a father who's resentful, and a father who was rejecting his own son. Because the truth was, I didn't want this disabled child. I wanted the child that I had before. And all of that came in a second. And I knew that I was not being a good father by carrying all that anger and resentment. And so I made a commitment to him that day. And I said, "Josh, I'm going to learn how to make peace with this life circumstance that's before me. And I'm going to learn to fall in love with the son that I have." And I would say that was the biggest lesson I learned about how to address adversity, because the anger and the resentment didn't serve anybody. And if you want to be of service, you have to learn to make peace with those hard things that we're facing. That doesn't mean that we don't confront them and deal with them, but we do it with a loving heart.
Thank you for sharing that, Ted. That is powerful. I don't think I've ever seen someone get a standing ovation in a Q&A before. But that was, wow, that was emotional. Wow. Since we're talking about emotions, there's an emotion that has been really running things a lot over the last 5 years. And I think every speaker, knowingly or unknowingly, has brought this up at some time during their talk. And this is the emotion of fear. Everything that has transpired over this entire period and how long it was sustained for, it's all been fear-based. The control of the population, the fear instilled via the government, the so-called public health experts, people in the media, even just everyday citizens. All of it was fear-driven. It wasn't logic, it wasn't rationale, it was just fear. Fear of death, but I would say even more so, far more prevalent was the fear of social disapproval and the fear of being isolated or standing out. So for anyone who's out there who would like to be a little bit more bold or courageous or less fearful, whatever capacity they understand that in, maybe if we can just go through each of the speakers and just have a quick, brief tip, because I do want to get to a couple Q&A questions. Just any advice or a word you can give just on fear and overcoming that with faith, courage, and bravery. Would you like to start, Dr. McCullough?
Yeah, I never considered myself particularly courageous. You know, in medicine, there's no checkbox in for medical school application for courage. Unlike a police officer or a combat soldier or someone else who would actually have to put their life on the line. But I can tell you that what's occurred over the last several years for all of us has transformed us. In many ways, our process by which we overcame the fear, not only of the pandemic, but also of coercion and reprisal that we faced, it has brought us into a far more meaningful phase of our lives than we ever could have imagined. And I can tell you that's happened to me personally. I had a very productive academic career. I've watched the whole career become dismantled. But I'm actually now far more fulfilled and rewarded in my work. And I think all of you probably in your lives sense that too. And our work is not over. So those are my words. I don't think there's any magic to this, but many of us are actually far more fulfilled, that we have a sense of purpose to a greater degree than we did before the pandemic.
Amen.
I thought I had thick skin before the pandemic. When I spoke up in 2020, early 2020, I was just doing science. I had no idea what I was going to face, and it became very clear very early on that everything I thought I valued was going to be risked, like professionally, not personally, right? I thought I was going to lose my job. I thought I was going to lose my reputation. And in summer of 2020, I was filled with anxiety. I lost 30 pounds of weight because I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I didn't eat or sleep. I was just, just in my mind thinking, okay, well, everything's gone. And the university sent me this signal that if I just stayed quiet, I could go back to being the old professor I was. And that made things worse, actually, the anxiety. And when I decided that I had to keep speaking. I had no choice. I mean, there were people that were hurting, that were reaching out to me, asking for help with what little I had to offer. I thought, okay, what's the purpose of my job? What's the purpose of all this fancy university, whatever? It's nothing. It is nothing. It's the only purpose is to love other people. And then the anxiety lifted. I started going on TV, which is a very strange thing. And then here I am. I agree with Peter that I feel more fulfilled in my life than I ever have. And all those old wishes that I have, desires. It's not that they're all gone, but they're not central drivers to me. I don't really deeply need them anymore. I need something. I need to be fulfilling my purpose, whatever, and I feel that's that's what's led me to be able to speak up. I have a very wise friend who says, everything you want is on the other side of fear. And I think she's completely right.
So, again, everything's been spot on thus far. The one little focus I would put on it would be decide with great clarity what is right. And then it's easy, because you have to do what's right. A quick story, I was interviewing RFK Jr., and at the end he goes, "You're so brave to interview me." And I thought, for Dr. Lure to talk, it's bravery? And then it just occurred to me, I went, oh, we're under attack. I must keep going. This was 2 or 3 years ago for me, and I thought, this is important, this is right, and it's a calling, like Peter is saying, Dr. McCullough is saying, it transforms you, and you just have to do it when the time comes. You'll know it. It doesn't feel like bravery. It doesn't feel like courage. It feels like doing the right thing.
Emotions and messages, they really contain some very important information. They're within our psyche to alert us to things. Now, fear is a very interesting emotion, and it alerts us to a threat, and it alerts us to ego threats and other things. And fear really is the currency of control. The world was controlled via fear, and it wasn't accidental. It wasn't accidental to the point that it was intentional. I recently interviewed Gary Sidley, who's a retired UK psychologist, 30 years in the NHS, and he was absolutely appalled by what the nudge units and SAGE, the advisory group in the UK, was those psychologists, behavioural scientists. There wasn't any people that knew anything about the virus on there. It was, how do we get people to comply? And in support from Panda, Gary wrote a paper, and it was published, and it's really worth a read. And I may mention a few of the quotes tomorrow, and one of them that really stuck with me was the nudge unit turned around and said, the youth are not sufficiently scared. They do not feel at high risk. Well, there's a fact. So they went about scaring the living daylights out of them. Now, we went through a PowerPoint presentation, which is 40 PowerPoint slides. I don't want to deaf my PowerPoint. But this next bit is shocking. And this next bit should be known by every parent in the world. The Stephen Hawkins Foundation, which used somebody's name that's very popular, got together a couple of think tanks and probably a couple of timeshare salesmen. And they put together, it's a historical document. We deconstructed it. There is hundreds of uses of psychological manipulation. There is misinformation continuously, and the aim was to scare the child so much that they would demand the parent take them to a vaccination clinic. One quote in there, would you get a vaccination to save your grandma? What child would say no to that? So fear really is something that has revealed the hand of the people pushing what's going on today. And we should really let everyone know that this is not okay.
Well, I've got a couple of thoughts. One, in my role as president of Vaccine Choice Canada, I've had the opportunity to interview many of the wonderful heroes that have stood up and addressed the adversity and spoken truth. And a question that I asked many of them is, or a comment I would make to them is, to to thank them for their courage. And I have to tell you that every single one of those people said to me, it wasn't an act of courage. And Dr. Pinsky, you made reference to this, is they did what they did because it was the right thing to do. I also think that this time, I agree with David, is a time of opportunity. It's a time of awakening. And sometimes we think it's about somebody else's awakening, and I would invite us to look at our own awakening. I think what fear does is it teaches us about what we're holding on to, what we're afraid to lose. And when we work through that, then there is no fear. And then the final thought is, in my journey with my son, I had the good opportunity to work with Eckhart Tolle, who's the author of the book, The Power of Now. And I got to work with Eckhart very early in his journey of teaching. And I sat in a room with him with about 10 other people. And the question that he asked us was, where do you live? And then he said, I'm not interested in what city you live in. I want to know whether you live in the past, the present, or the future. And what he taught us is that fear is always about living in the future and telling yourself a negative story. And so the antidote is live in the present. In this moment, there's nothing to be afraid of. And if you're going to be in the future, then tell yourself a good story.
Thank you all for your insights there. That's a question that I get asked a lot. I get asked so often about fear and about how people can be more bold and be more courageous. And I have an interesting take on courage, and I don't think courage, I think it's typically thought of as simply a personality trait. There are some people who are brave, there are some people who are courageous, and there's just some people who are not. That might be true to some degree, but I believe that courage and cowardice are both habits. I think that once you form the habit of cowardice, of always taking the easy route out, never voicing your concerns, always avoiding the conflict, never wanting to rock the boat, then I think every time you do that, it gets reinforced. And I think the same is true of courage. I think if you become a person who, when you've got something to say, you speak up. When there's something that you're massively opposed to, which is being pushed, which you're not comfortable with, you raise your hand and you say something, you make a challenge. I think by doing that multiple times throughout the day, I think every single day we have multiple opportunities to do this. And I think that once you create that habit, you get to the point where it doesn't even feel like courage or bravery, it's just the way that you operate. And I think that whoever you are, whatever workplace or environment that you are in, you will find little ways where you can just nudge yourself away from that cowardly habit more towards one of courage. And once you do that, I think that's really how we win. That's how we win. So I'm just going to take due to time, I'm just going to take one question. It's the one that was rated the highest of the questions that have come through on the Q&A. And I think this is probably best addressed by someone who's more local. And it's a question from Marvin, and this is about the state of British Columbia public health. So he has written, and I guess this can apply to other places as well, but he's asked, what can we do as citizens to get the draconian mandates against our healthcare students, nurses, and doctors removed? So yeah, what can citizens do to have mandates removed? Anyone have an answer on the tip of their tongue on this one?
I hesitate to answer, but let me. So did you all hear that? That apparently the NDP minister said that, or some NDP representative said that this conference is hate speech.
This is love speech.
Well, we do hate lies.
All right, so as an American, I'm very loath to tip my toe into Canadian politics, as I know I know it with very good reason why you wouldn't want to listen to Americans, because God knows we have our major problems ourselves. But let me just give you some generic advice, I guess, because this applies not just to Canada, but literally to every country that has faced this ridiculous public health policy. It is almost impossible to get politicians on all sides to put the reform of public health in the agenda. And the reason is very simple, is that almost every politician, almost every political party signed on to the lockdowns in some way or another. Some much more enthusiastic than others. There's very, very rare exceptions to that case, right? And what that means is that the politicians view putting lockdowns on the agenda as a threat to themselves. So whatever your political party is, if you oppose the lockdowns, if you've come to oppose the lockdowns, you've been harmed by the public health policies, and you want a better way, you want democratic representation of these policies in your polity, go to your political leaders and say, this belongs in your call to action, in your agenda, and it doesn't matter which party. If every party thinks that it's in their interest to address it, then all of a sudden it becomes no longer a political issue, it just becomes a fact. That's how we win. Make it a fact. It doesn't matter what your politics are on a million. Do you like the minimum wage? Do you don't like the minimum wage? Do you want it lower? I don't really care. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. Everyone was harmed by these lockdowns. Literally everyone on the face of the earth was harmed by these lockdowns. They were harmed by the mandates, even if they themselves abided by them. They were harmed in some concrete way because they were isolated from their neighbor. And so we need to make it by putting it, there's an irony here, by putting it in front and center of your political leaders, say you have to address this, no matter which party you are, it'll become no longer political after we win.
The greatest concern that I hear is actually not about masking or lockdowns. It's about being mandated to take a vaccine, right? I mean, that's really what we're talking about. People know it's possible that under a vaccine mandate, they can take a vaccine and lose their life. That's what's putting people on edge, is personally losing your life due to a vaccine. This is so important. No vaccine is safe enough to mandate. No vaccine is effective enough to mandate. And you need intellectual support for this. The Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, which is a chartered medical group in the United States of doctors, actually many of them are top doctors in their graduating class, was called Alpha Omega Alpha in the United States. In the year 2000, they published a resolution that said no mandate can ever exist for a vaccine, for any vaccine, period. That's in 2000. That's how far ahead they were. They called for the complete removal of all COVID-19 vaccines off the market. They've called for the abolition of all vaccine mandates. So has the World Council for Health. So has the Florida Surgeon General Joe Ladapo. And so has multiple states, including the most populous states in the United States, including Texas. In Texas, it's illegal to mandate someone to take a vaccine and have them lose their life due to the vaccine. The COVID vaccines are sufficiently dangerous, they can't be mandated because people can lose their lives. This has to be presented front and center over and over again to every single doctor, every single nurse, every single politician, every single person you talk to over and over and over again. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the preservation of life. This really has to be put on edge. A good person to follow is Dr. Mary Talley Bowden on Twitter. She's keeping track of all the elected officials and candidates in the United States who have said publicly that the vaccine should be removed from the market, mandates should be abolished. And that number continues to grow every day.
David, do you want to have the final word on this one?
Yes, well,
Agreed.
Thank you.
maybe we can add some practical things to this. I actually was fortunate enough to work on the NHS 100K project in the UK. So I don't know if anyone's familiar that in the UK they were trying to mandate for all the health workers. And we had really made the decision that it's the tiptoe. So once they get that in, then they've got license to really just keep moving that bar. So basically, a huge amount of groups got together and used that as a single focus to work together. So there was literally hundreds of us that would meet every morning and lay out a strategy of how we were going to stop this. And we had a lot of luck. So we had, I don't know if anyone remembers, Steve Jones was a doctor, and he got interviewed on live TV with the Prime Minister at the time and managed to really just stick a massive wedge in. This isn't going to work, and they wasn't able to react to it. So I'd say you want to strategize, you want to get organized, you want to understand what the message is. You need to know that people don't remember lines of text. They remember, who's going to forget Ted's story? Ever. I'll never forget that moment, okay? And this is what captures hearts and minds. It's taking the facts that are clear and telling them in a story that moves someone. And that's what we did. We had lots of graphical artists, we had lots of messages, we had a very clear message. Then there was hundreds of thousands of people marching through London. And they couldn't do it because they knew they were going to lose so much support, because the clear thing is to get everyone on your side. So we were saying, look, we want to protect the NHS. We want to protect the people. If you lose all these members of staff, it's going to kill the NHS. So it was really thinking about strategically, what is the stories, what are the messages, get people together. And in fact, we're actually working on something like this. So if the person that asked that question, if they want to email me, then we're actually going to produce a few documents on how to go about being effective in campaigns. Because what you've got is a lot of people, you look at a politician has so much training how to deliver a message that's usually not based in any reality. So it was like in the gym, they talk about all show and no go. Has anyone heard that? It's literally all about the veneer and the mask. So we really need to understand that and get that message across. So yeah, I'm happy to share that when we've got that document finished.
Awesome, thank you. Can we have a round of applause one more time for our amazing speakers and panelists? Thank you.